1 minute ago, a wall of water taller than a two-story building surged across Santa Monica Pier, swallowing playground equipment and flipping lifeguard trucks like toys. Across 1,200 miles of coastline from Southern California to Washington state, emergency sirens wail as the Pacific Ocean rewrites the boundary between sea and land. This is not a tsunami. This is something science is only beginning to understand. Why are engineered seawalls crumbling in minutes? What invisible force is amplifying wave energy far beyond forecast models? And why can't the nation's best meteorologists predict when the next surge will strike? Fatal rainstorms have been hammering California for 72 hours. In communities near Palm Springs, mudslides tear through neighborhoods still scarred by last year's wildfires, where burnt slopes offer no resistance to rushing water. Entire blocks evacuate as debris flows bury roads under 6 feet of mud mixed with charred timber and boulders the size of cars. Emergency crews work in shifts, pulling vehicles from the muck before the next surge arrives. Flash flooding intensifies across burn scars that stretch for hundreds of square miles. When fire strips vegetation from hillsides, the soil loses its structure, turning slopes into avalanche zones waiting for rain. Hydrologists warned this would happen, but the scale defies their models. From San Diego to Seattle, the West Coast has become a continuous disaster zone. Atmospheric rivers stall offshore, dumping moisture without pause, while beneath the surface, something far more dangerous builds. But this was only the first warning. Offshore sensors began detecting anomalies 3 hours before sunrise. Buoys positioned 12 miles west of Malibu recorded wave heights climbing from 8 feet to 26 feet in less than 40 minutes. The National Weather Service upgraded advisories to warnings, then to emergency alerts as the readings kept rising. NOAA's data showed waves arriving with periods exceeding 22 seconds, carrying energy accumulated across thousands of miles of open ocean. At Santa Monica Pier, the first wave hit at 5:47 a.m. local time. Surveillance footage shows water climbing over railings designed to withstand 15-foot surges, flooding the iconic carousel and arcade. Within minutes, Pacific Coast Highway near Malibu vanishes under 3 feet of churning seawater mixed with sand, kelp, and shattered pier planks. Morning commuters abandon vehicles as salt spray coats windshields and engines choke on brine. Urban coastal spaces designed for recreation become unrecognizable. Playgrounds where children played hours earlier sit submerged. Beach volleyball courts disappear beneath advancing foam lines. Roads that carried thousands of cars daily transform into rivers of debris, forcing highway patrol to close entire corridors. Emergency warnings escalate beyond surfers to entire communities. Evacuation orders spread block by block as officials realize standard protocols were designed for storms half this intense. The central question emerges not in press briefings, but in the stunned silence of engineers watching their defenses fail in real time. What came next shocked even the scientists. In Newport Beach, seawalls built to withstand 100-year storms breach in the first hour. Video from security cameras shows concrete barriers shuddering under repeated impacts, each wave hammering the same weak points until cracks spider outward and entire sections collapse into the surf. Streets flood with such speed that parked cars float sideways, crashing into storefronts and each other. Lifeguard trucks designed for beach rescues become trapped as water rises past their axles. 3 crew members evacuate on foot, wading through chest-deep water that tastes of salt and motor oil. Local officials describe a scene beyond their emergency plans, infrastructure crumbling faster than response teams can mobilize. 1,200 miles north in Westport, Washington, the harbor district floods within minutes of the first major surge. Commercial fishing boats strain against moorings as waves overtop docks built 20 feet above normal high tide. The harbor master's office, positioned on what city planners considered safe elevation, takes water through ground floor windows. Downtown businesses evacuate as the Pacific pushes 3 blocks inland, depositing fish, crabs, and twisted metal where parking meters once stood. Drone footage reveals the sudden shoreline loss. What was dry beach at dawn becomes indistinguishable from the surf zone by noon. The boundary between land and sea shifts 200 feet inland in some locations, erasing summer landmarks and exposing foundations engineers never expected to see wet. And the signs were already spreading. The difference between today's waves and typical coastal swells lies hidden in the physics of wave formation. Wind-driven waves, the kind that surfers read and beachgoers watch, form locally and travel short distances. Their periods, the time between successive crests, average 6 to 10 seconds. Long-period swells originate differently. These waves begin as storm systems thousands of miles across the Pacific, transferring wind energy into the ocean's surface over days of sustained gales. That energy travels outward as organized wave trains, maintaining coherence across entire ocean basins. The crucial distinction is their period. Swells arriving today register periods between 18 and 24 seconds, carrying exponentially more energy than shorter waves. When these swells reach the narrow continental shelf off California and Washington, they encounter shallow water that forces dramatic changes. Wave energy that travels unimpeded in deep oceans suddenly interacts with the seabed. The waves slow, compress, and build vertically, amplifying heights far beyond what offshore measurements would predict. Data from NOAA buoys positioned along the continental shelf edge show this amplification in real time. A swell measuring 15 feet in deep water transforms into a 30-foot breaker within 2 miles of shore. The physics is straightforward, but the speed and violence catch even experienced forecasters off guard. Energy that crossed the Pacific in 5 days releases in seconds against beaches, piers, and seawalls never designed for such concentrated force. Flooding in Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay, and typically protected coves confirms what the data suggests. These long-period swells penetrate harbor mouths and wrap around headlands, reaching areas that standard wave models identify as sheltered. Infrastructure fails not because it was poorly built, but because it was designed for a wave climate that no longer exists. But the ground had one more secret. This is not a single storm, but a convergence event unfolding across multiple timescales. Long-period swells generated by a low-pressure system off Japan 5 days ago now arrive simultaneously with swells from a different storm near the Aleutian Islands. Local atmospheric rivers add their own contribution, whipping up wind-driven seas that ride atop the deeper swells. The combined effect overwhelms every natural and engineered defense. Highways buckle under salt spray and standing water. Coastal roads connecting towns from Big Sur to Cannon Beach close as asphalt cracks and entire sections slide into the surf. Authorities estimate that restoring full access will take weeks, leaving some communities reachable only by helicopter or boat. The realization spreads through emergency operations centers. The energy battering these shores originated days earlier and thousands of miles away. Modern forecasting tracks storm systems with impressive accuracy, yet predicting how distant swells will interact with local conditions remains beyond current capabilities. The gap between what satellites observe and what beaches experience grows wider with each passing hour. Rogue waves enter the equation with their own unpredictable fury. These outliers form when wave trains traveling at different speeds converge, stacking energy vertically for brief, terrifying moments. Scientific confirmation through satellite and deep water buoys shows rogue waves reaching heights twice the surrounding swell, appearing and vanishing within seconds. Eyewitness accounts from Pacifica describe out-of-sequence waves smashing into the municipal pier without warning. One moment, swells roll past at regular intervals. The next, a wall of water 3 times higher engulfs the structure, snapping pilings and scattering spectators. Coast Guard helicopters respond to multiple maritime emergencies as commercial vessels report being struck by waves that should not exist according to sea state forecasts.
The challenge of forecasting chaotic wave interference pushes oceanography to its limits. Rogue waves defy statistical models based on average conditions. They represent the convergence of multiple wave trains at precise moments and locations, events that current technology can observe but cannot reliably predict. Scientists distinguish these ocean phenomena from sneaker waves that strike the shore, but both share a common trait: they arrive when conditions appear safe, catching people unprepared. Northern California coastal communities have learned to fear these deceptive assaults. Unlike tsunamis triggered by earthquakes, sneaker waves form from storm-generated swells traveling vast distances. They surge up beaches without warning, sometimes more than 150 feet beyond the normal waterline, moving with highway speeds and carrying enough sand and gravel to trap victims under crushing weight. Oregon State University researchers confirmed these waves often occur after periods of gentle surf lasting 10 to 20 minutes, a false calm that lulls beachgoers into dangerous proximity. This accelerating pattern now consumes emergency response across the entire West Coast. Coastal defenses engineered for extreme events discover those definitions no longer apply. Seawalls, levees, and berms designed using historical data from past century storms face conditions beyond their specifications. In some locations, engineers calculated for once-in-a-100-year events. Today's waves strike with the energy of once-in-a-500-year scenarios, according to preliminary analysis by structural engineers surveying the damage. Repeated impacts crack concrete that should last decades. Each wave hammers the same stress points, exploiting microscopic flaws until failures cascade. Floodgates flex beyond engineered tolerances, their hydraulic systems groaning under loads they were never meant to bear. Some gates hold, but others buckle, allowing seawater to surge into neighborhoods planners assured would remain dry.
Saltwater intrusion reaches power substations and utility corridors. Transformer stations built on elevated platforms take spray from waves that overtop 30-foot berms. Salt corrodes electrical contacts, triggering cascading failures that plunge entire districts into darkness. Urban areas previously considered immune to coastal flooding discover their infrastructure sits within reach of an ocean that refuses to observe old boundaries. Water flows through streets where residents never imagined needing flood insurance. Basements fill with brine that destroys furnaces, water heaters, and electrical panels. The economic toll compounds with each passing hour as businesses shutter and families evacuate to shelters overwhelmed by numbers they were never designed to accommodate. The truth becomes inescapable in footage streaming from satellites positioned thousands of miles overhead. Satellite imagery reveals storm systems behaving in ways that contradict established patterns. Atmospheric rivers that typically cross the west coast and dissipate over interior mountains instead stall offshore, feeding on warm ocean pockets and regenerating strength. These narrow bands of concentrated moisture stretch across thousands of miles, conveying water vapor comparable to the flow of major river systems. What satellites show and what forecast models predicted diverge catastrophically. Meteorologists watch low-pressure systems track eastward across the Pacific, expecting them to weaken as they approached land. Instead, the systems slow, intensify, and park just offshore, creating persistent moisture plumes that feed incoming swells. This breakdown of traditional land-sea weather boundaries leaves forecasters scrambling to revise predictions that are obsolete within hours. Real-time data contradicts expectations so consistently that emergency managers begin questioning whether any forecast beyond 12 hours holds value. The atmosphere and ocean appear locked in feedback loops that amplify rather than dissipate energy, turning the Pacific into a generator of sustained coastal assault. What scientists discover in the data changes everything. Elevated sea surface temperatures across the Pacific provide the thermal engine driving this crisis. NOAA's latest measurements show water temperatures 1 to 3 degrees Celsius above historical averages for late December. That seemingly modest difference translates into dramatically increased atmospheric moisture and wave energy. Warmer water evaporates faster, feeding atmospheric rivers that carry more precipitation. It also allows waves to maintain energy longer as they cross cooler waters that would normally dissipate their force. The reinforcing cycles between ocean heat and storm persistence create conditions unprecedented in the observational record.
Each atmospheric river deposits moisture that warms coastal waters through latent heat release. Those warmer waters then fuel the next wave of storms, establishing a feedback loop that intensifies rather than exhausts itself. Scientists monitoring these patterns express concern that current models no longer reflect reality, their assumptions based on a climate that has already shifted. Evidence of a new baseline for West Coast wave activity accumulates in databases and damaged infrastructure alike. Comparison with records from previous decades shows wave heights and frequencies climbing beyond natural variability. The ocean is changing, and the coast is paying the price. The ocean's assault reshapes geography in days rather than centuries. Coastal erosion that would normally require decades now unfolds during single storm events. Dunes built over centuries vanish overnight. Beaches that stretched 200 feet from bluff to waterline shrink to narrow strips barely 10 feet wide. Exposure of tree roots, infrastructure foundations, and geological strata never meant to face wave action signals the creation of a new coastline carved by forces beyond historical precedent. In some locations, waves breach natural barriers and create new inlets connecting bays to the ocean. Emergency crews watching from helicopters describe landscapes transforming hour by hour. Sandbags and emergency repairs installed at dawn wash away by afternoon. Entire hillsides slump into the surf as wave action undercuts their base, triggering landslides that dump thousands of tons of earth into the churning water. The growing sense of impermanence along the coast manifests in property values, insurance rates, and the haunted expressions of residents who have lived by the ocean their entire lives. The beach they knew is gone, and no one can say if it will return or continue retreating. Critical systems fail faster than repairs can restore them. Power grid failures spread as saltwater reaches inland substations never anticipated to flood. Transformer stations designed with margins based on historical flood heights discover those margins no longer exist. Cascading outages plunge hospitals onto emergency generators, their fuel supplies sufficient for 72 hours if no complications arise. Those complications arrive immediately as delivery trucks cannot reach refueling sites through flooded roads.
Commercial and industrial zones flood with seawater that destroys everything it touches. Manufacturing equipment, refrigerated warehouses, and data centers all face catastrophic damage. Storm drains and spillways designed to handle rainfall cannot cope with marine intrusion that arrives already at capacity and keeps rising. Cities shift into crisis mode that exceeds their standard flood scenarios. San Francisco, after losing power to coastal neighborhoods, Maria Santos clutched her daughter's hand on the second floor of their outer Sunset home, watching seawater climb the front steps. Her street, 12 blocks from Ocean Beach, had never flooded in the 40 years her family had lived there. The smell of brine mixed with the acrid tang of electrical shorts as transformers blew across the neighborhood. "We kept thinking it would stop," she would later tell emergency responders. But it just kept coming, block after block, like the ocean decided the city was too close. They escaped through a neighbor's attic window onto the roof, joining 6 other families waiting for rescue helicopters that took 4 hours to arrive. The evacuation breakdown reveals fatal gaps between warnings issued and public response. Low compliance rates plague emergency managers, who discover that decades of false alarms have conditioned residents to ignore all but the most dire predictions. When those dire predictions arrive, many wait too long, hoping conditions will improve or doubting that evacuation is truly necessary. Roads disappear faster than evacuation plans can adapt. Routes designated as primary escape corridors flood or collapse, forcing rescuers to improvise new paths through unfamiliar terrain. Helicopter and boat rescues become essential as ground transportation fails completely in some areas. Real-time decision-making replaces standard emergency procedures as conditions evolve too rapidly for pre-written playbooks to remain relevant. Beneath the surface, ecosystems collapse. Displacement of seals, whales, and marine birds marks ecological disruption extending beyond immediate human concerns. Unusual strandings along beaches from San Diego to Vancouver Island suggest marine mammals fleeing turbulent coastal waters. Researchers find disoriented seals miles inland, having followed flood channels into urban areas.
Whale sightings occur in harbors where the animals never venture under normal conditions, their navigation confused by churning water that obscures acoustic landmarks. Intertidal ecosystems, the rich zones between high and low tide that harbor immense biodiversity, suffer catastrophic losses. Organisms adapted to regular tidal cycles face sustained battering that exceeds their tolerance. Rocky shore communities that took decades to establish wash away in hours. The long-term ecological consequences remain unknown, but preliminary assessments suggest recovery timelines measured in years or decades. Science struggles to keep pace with accelerating change. Forecast models repeatedly underestimate wave magnitude by margins that would have been impossible just 5 years ago. The tools and data that reliably predicted coastal conditions for decades now produce results that bear little resemblance to observed reality. Oceanographers analyzing the discrepancies identify multiple factors: warming oceans, altered atmospheric circulation, and wave interactions that existing models cannot capture. Calls for expanded sensor networks and improved hazard mapping intensify as scientists recognize that historical data has lost its predictive value. The past, once considered the guide for future preparedness, now misleads more than it informs. Building codes, insurance rates, and evacuation plans all rest on assumptions that no longer hold. Records fall not once, but repeatedly as each storm surpasses the previous benchmark. Measurement stations along the coast that stood for decades register readings that exceed their maximum scales. Engineers must recalibrate instruments designed when a 20-foot wave represented an extreme outlier, not a regular occurrence. The implications extend beyond immediate disaster response into existential questions about coastal habitation. Traditional disaster terminology loses relevance when 100-year events occur every winter. Coastal defense strategies shift from seasonal preparation to permanent vigilance. Governments debate retreat, relocation, and fundamental remapping of urban boundaries. The economic pressures mount as insurance companies recalculate risk and property values plummet in areas once considered prime real estate. Across harbors, fire stations, and evacuation centers, responders and residents adapt in real time to a crisis without precedent. Emergency drills that seemed adequate months ago now appear dangerously insufficient. Cleanup efforts begin before the waves have finished, crews working around surges to clear roads and restore power. Economic uncertainty shadows every decision as business owners calculate whether rebuilding makes sense when the next storm could arrive within weeks. The margin for error narrows with each passing season. Survival is measured one rescue at a time, one sandbag, one evacuated family. The infrastructure that protected previous generations proves inadequate, and no one knows whether what we build today will stand tomorrow. The data confirms what residents see with their own eyes. Coastlines redraw themselves with every surge. Boundaries between sea and land that held for generations now shift daily. The ocean, once a background presence, has become an active force reshaping human geography. Preparedness can no longer mean returning to normal because normal no longer exists. Scientists know warming ocean temperatures fuel more intense atmospheric rivers. They know wave energy correlates with sea surface anomalies. They know continental shelf geometry amplifies swells in predictable ways. They have models, data, and centuries of observation backing their understanding of ocean atmosphere dynamics. What they cannot predict is when. They cannot say which storm will stall offshore or which wave train will converge with others to create that perfect destructive interference. They cannot guarantee that engineering standards developed over decades will protect against conditions emerging over months. The accelerating pattern is documented, measured, and undeniable. What remains unknown is where this escalation ends. Will the Pacific settle into new equilibrium, or will each season bring intensification beyond the last? Can coastal communities adapt fast enough, or will entire cities face strategic retreat from shorelines their founders thought permanent? And when the next wave arrives, larger and faster than any model predicted, will the warning system science has built prove sufficient to save lives, or will the gap between knowledge and response continue to widen? The ocean has spoken. It does not negotiate, explain, or wait for readiness. It simply rises, crashes, and reshapes whatever stands in its path. The question is no longer whether we will face more of these crises, but whether we can survive them.